Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with the great writer and scholar, Ciahnan Darrell. He is committed to using his craft to help engage the world. His first novel, A Lifetime of Men, won the Mid-Atlantic Regional Award and won a Bronze Medalist for General Fiction in 2021 Reader's View Choice Awards. His second novel, Blood at the Root, has been described by critics as a sharp-witted social satire that takes unflinching aim at race and class privilege in contemporary America. We have a great conversation. Enjoy this interview.
Hey, good morning. It's Joe Dimino.
Joe, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on? How's life?
Can't complain.
Cool. Well, hey, man, thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. And anytime I get a chance to talk about art and music, you can't say no to that.
Yeah, right. Especially with these times we're living in. It's the oasis. And I think that's a part of, what I've probed with a lot of musicians over this time, especially jazz, because that's my niche, is that, if we didn't have music and art and television and all these things over COVID, it would have been a much darker time on planet Earth.
Oh, definitely. I agree 100%.
So you had quite a list on Twitter. I dug looking at it. You had Kind of Blue. You had a little Billie Holiday on there. You had Mingus. There was a lot of good stuff. So have you been a fan of jazz for quite a while?
Yes and no. So yes, in that I have been listening to it for some time. No, in the sense that I really sort of have very little technical or musicological, if that's a word, sense of what jazz is. I could tell you the history. I could even tell you how Wikipedia says that it originated. But by and large, I wouldn't be somebody who could sit down and talk about the technical merits of, one album versus another, or one period of an artist's life versus another.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of jazz. And I think it's funny you say that, because I think that's kind of the corner that musicians in this idiom get painted into, is that there's a level of this that has to be highbrow, and you got to get to the techniques of it. One of the reasons why I do jazz is because it hits you on that emotive level. It's a very cerebral thing, and a lot of people that love jazz just can't even really explain in any technical way. It's just a feeling that you get. So I think that, to me, that's the beauty of jazz, is that it's an overwhelming, engulfing feeling of just, you just feel good when you listen to it.
Yeah, so I would describe the way we're taught to live in the world as being based on mastery. You learn certain words and you make sentences. You learn certain values and you live towards them. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need that, or we'd be in a heck of a bind. But I think what jazz does is it allows you to experience life as experience, to feel something as experience, rather than having to slot it into, say, some category or definition, which would then necessarily reduce what it actually is. Because, jazz, it enlarges, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So to kind of begin things, before we get into your life as a writer and a scholar, I want to know, how did you do over COVID? How did this period change you now that we're emerging out of it? How are you doing?
Well, it was a very interesting experience, because I would characterize myself as a fairly significant introvert. People aren't something that I've spent a whole lot of time trying to amass, so to speak. My family is important, and I value people as having intrinsic value, but by and large, if I have myself a book or myself and some music, I'm happy. And what COVID did is it pushed this, right? It tested it, in the sense that now these things, which I never really sought out, weren't readily available. And so I found myself asking a lot more questions about the way in which I interacted with the people around me than I had prior to COVID. I've always enjoyed my family. I was actually very happy to spend more time with them. And I went on a lot of hikes with my family. During a hike, there'd be other people out there too. And it would be a quiet or distant conversation. But it became a part of a hike that I kind of looked forward to, which surprised me. I think the hardest thing about COVID for me was reading the news, looking around, and being like, oh my God, that person would drive the truck over me for their convenience. I mean, how little we were willing to do for each other was stunning. Put a mask on. And you have people getting up in arms about rights and whatnot, rather than just saying, yeah, okay, I'll be uncomfortable for a few minutes to take the chance that I don't transmit this deadly disease.
Yeah, and I think what the pandemic really did bring to light, even with all of the racial issues and even class war issues from George Floyd, was that we were already a country teetering on the brink of a lot of different things. And then you throw a pandemic in there, and it's just, it was enough to ignite things that we just kind of buried because we were going so fast. And I think once we slowed down and the world kind of had a chance to kind of inhale a little bit, I think we started discovering that. But you're right. I'm surprised. I haven't heard it said in that way, but yeah, there was a level of empathy and compassion that was relatively low for such a event that affected everyone, because sometimes these things affect certain countries or portions of the world. This was the whole ball of wax, man. This was everyone.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. It was up and down the supply chain line, so to speak. If you had means, then yes, you had a better time of it, but everybody was experiencing some shortages, some inconveniences, some restrictions on their ability to live and move. And I guess at the end of it, I kept waiting for that, that post-Katrina moment, by which I mean, if you remember after Hurricane Katrina, some of the interviews they did down in neighborhoods in New Orleans or whatever, there actually did seem to be this coming together. These people who may not have been of the same race or gender or sexuality did seem to have some feeling for each other. But what I saw happening with COVID was much different. What I saw coming out of that was everybody was in their cars, metaphorically speaking, had the gas jammed down to the floor, and was getting the hell out of Dodge as quickly as they can. Not really taking a minute to think about who might be left behind because they don't have a car.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I noticed that too. The one thing that was great about covering the world of jazz musicians over this time is that they were resoundingly positive. And that community really did accumulate new skills and ways of presenting their music. And then as a byproduct, my wife and I see a lot of shows here in Kansas City, and I could just tell the crowds were different. There was, musicians have talked about that, They were really paying attention in ways that they didn't before. Conversations went away, which was so good and has been so good. So I think in different pockets of our society, there's things that really did kind of turn into that post 9/11 moment, so to speak, of unity and community. So, hopefully some of those things stick around for a lot longer than, say, a month or a year, and they're, a residual that we can hold on to.
Yeah, and I think that people like you doing things like this, just telling me that, 3-sentence story you did about the coming together, I think that's really important too. I'm not saying turn away from all the not fun stuff, but every once in a while, I think it's really important that we hold up this picture to ourselves as a society and say, this is what we're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. I have a pretty decent sense based on what I've read about you, about being a writer and a scholar, but if you were right now transported to an elementary school in front of a bunch of kids on career day, and one of them looks up at you and says, what do you do every day? What is it that you do, and why are you so good at what you do? How would you answer that?
I think that the biggest part of what I do is I read and then I think. I spend hours just sitting at my desk, just sort of waiting for a voice to step forward or to try and sort of get some purchase on a world as a result of what I've read and thought. And I wish I could go back and teach my elementary school self about the work of attention. And I know that doesn't sound like a sexy way to put it, but paying attention, it requires reflection before and after. It requires a purpose. It requires knowing what it is that you're on the lookout for. And I think the most important thing that any writer can do from a young age is to begin to put those practices into place, to try and see the world as it is, or as it's showing itself to you, rather than just trying to, making everything about you or using yourself as the lens which you see things through.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think we would be much better off if we took it for what we saw. So, you mentioned art and music and how good it is to be bathed in that, to talk about it. And I'm curious, in your life and timeline, what album or book in the very beginning grabbed your attention that maybe you still come back to, that just kind of parted the curtains for you?
Well, in terms of jazz albums, I started with Billie Holiday, and I'll probably never get past her. Not that anyone would ever want to. I mean, there's a lifetime of richness there. But I saw, or heard rather, in her songs, something that felt deeper than just what the words were saying, something that seemed to even escape from her, in the sense that it wasn't like I was listening to her and the message she wanted to give me. It was that there is something happening in her, coming from her, changing this moment, that is significant, even if I can't name that significance. Unlike most people, or I think unlike most people, my favorite Billie Holiday album is Lady in Satin. It's the one where her voice is completely wrecked, her life really. This woman who is known for the purity of her tone, the beauty of her voice, kind of sounds like she's chewing gravel. But as you listen to it, it's that experience, not mastery. It's that absorption, or this power emanating from the record that says, I'm going to tell you not just about my suffering, but I'm going to take my suffering and my whole experience, and I'm going to transmute that into art. And I'm going to give that to you, and it's going to change you. I don't know how, but it is. It's no longer about trying to master the notes or, control her voice. It's very much of just her offering herself.
I was looking through some of the things in your bio that you've done, and I know that there was a particular focus that you had on South Africa. Speaking of hope in our world that we're in, we had a musician, Duzo Makatini. He's a piano player, and he got signed to Blue Note, and he's from Cape Town, and he came to Kansas City about a month and a half ago. And to this day, there's a handful of musicians that have done this to me in interviews that literally transported me to this place because they were so good. He was one of the most intellectual, kind, wonderful human beings I've ever been around. He came and played for a couple of days here, and there was a press conference and whatnot. He weaves all of that history of South Africa, the suffering and the triumphs and all of that into his music. And he's a little bit more on the avant abstract end of things, but he's so technically beautiful at what he does. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there when we were kind of talking about community and hope. I remember, I had the chance during that press conference to ask him about what it's like now that the world's opening up, and he can come to Kansas City from South Africa. And he was just talking about the amazing work that artists are going to be releasing now because they were doing all of this during a pretty heady time on the planet and being in quarantine. So anyway, I just found that interesting, and I'm curious from your angle, why did you pick that in particular, South Africa, to be a focus? So my PhD is in comparative literature, and I focused on depictions of violence in South African literature. And I kind of got there for a couple reasons. One is there's a writer by the name of J.M. Coetzee, who is just tremendous. His power and acumen are just almost startling. But so he led me to South Africa, and then one of his former students was one of my dissertation advisors. And he is from South Africa. And so just sort of, party by party, book by book, got deeper and deeper into the country. And it's a breathtaking, maddening, wonderful, rich and violent place. And it's the juxtaposition between the triumph that, say, the people in Hillbrow during
during apartheid lived in their music and their community and whatnot, even as the government was going around assassinating just normal people for simply because of their race. And so taking all this at once, it's all swirling in your head and just really being amazed by the expressions of power or of hope that came out of the country, and also by the devastation. And one of the things I do believe very much as an author is that, you know, joy isn't joy unless it can, you know, pierce the darkness. To show good things happening in your books or stories or music all the time is fun. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But real joy, by which I mean the true joy that is the miracle of human existence, that has more power than we can ask for or imagine. And so when you see these expressions, whether it's a song or a novel or a poem, coming out of darkest night, it's a reminder of what we are capable of.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about that in relationship to this country and what we've been going through and how divisive things are and how we all want to have hope for things getting better. And I heard a podcast about Nelson Mandela, and he was getting interviewed, and he was talking about how when he got arrested, he was arrested with 2 or 3 other people. I mean, he really thought that he was going to die. Like, he didn't think that, you know, it was going to get resolved, or he thought he was going to go to jail forever. And it's interesting during that whole expose how they got to the point where all of this revolution that he started gained momentum, and when he got out, he actually got to see the change that he fought for and how absolutely magnanimous that would have had to be in his brain to actually see in reality this dream that he had that made him go to jail for that long.
Yeah, and I think even to just accentuate what you're saying even more, let me just add a little bit of complexity to that image. The ANC their leadership weren't particularly fond of Mandela. He was the one who started the armed or the violent wing of the ANC movement, and that was not widely embraced. And then once he was in captivity, the Afrikaner government tried to use him against the ANC leadership to drive division into the resistance movement. So Mandela is this guy getting pulled in 6 different ways, who has very distinct opinions. He was literally royalty. He was educated. He was eloquent. And just he's a man who deserves far, far more attention than he gets, because the complexity of his circumstance, the complexity of the day and age, and the sheer temerity to even try what he accomplished is staggering.
So in your life, who would you consider role models or heroes? Someone that really kind of pushed you to better heights, greater heights?
Do you mean famous or family?
Anyone. Yeah, either one. Whatever was the most profound.
Well, so my mother is incredible. She's a survivor. She has overcome almost every type of malady and misfortune that you can imagine. She was young age-wise when she had me, and younger still as far as maturation goes. And this is something she says, so I'm not spilling tea or anything. And yet somehow she raised my brother and I, got us, safely through school into adulthood. And now my brother and I have degrees, we've got families, and we're more or less fully functioning members of society because of all she was willing to be and do for us. All the money she was willing to save, all the things she was willing to do without, all the love she was willing to give. And I don't know if it's this way for everybody, but for two young boys, it can be hard for a mother to raise them alone, because there is just some ineffable thing about the whole boy-girl that, guys are constantly looking for a father, or children are constantly looking for a father figure. And she was never offended by that, never felt like we were saying she wasn't enough, never felt like we were being ungrateful. In fact, she sought out people that would teach us what integrity means, what it meant to have a work ethic, what it meant to be a good person and a good man. So it all began with her. And I have to say, one of my earliest memories, if not the earliest, is of her reading from Leaves of Grass to me when I was very young. And, my father read to me too. But my mom really went out of her way to cement that love, to get me into books. She says, and I have no memory of this, but she says that when before I was 1, she would go and have a book, and she'd give me a book. And obviously I couldn't read, but she'd sit there reading, and I'd sit there and hold my book so it could be like her. So yeah, that's probably the answer I have to go with.
So if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now, who would it be?
Anybody alive? Well, that's a hard one. I met Marilynne Robinson, the author, one time in Chicago. She had been invited down for a job talk, and so she was there, and it was open to the public, so we came. And I watched as a department full of older white men basically did not give her the courtesy that she deserved. But she gave a talk with perfect poise, recalled ancient texts from memory, and then fielded questions that weren't questions so much as an attempt to put a woman in her place. And her answers were so insightful, and her comportment was so elegant that it stuck with me to this day. And I don't know if it's the right decision, but I would very much love to sit down with Marilynne Robinson and, just have a dinner, have an hour conversation about, the role of art in public and about religion in America.
So if you have a dream tonight, let's say you run into your younger version, in your 20s, and you could give your younger version one piece of advice based on what you've learned throughout your life up to this point. What advice would you give your younger version?
I would tell him that he needs to seek affirmation of who he is and of his art internally rather than externally. I would tell him that, external affirmation can feel really good. It's ultimately not that substantive. And the person that you have to live with, the person that you have to convince of the validity of the life you've chosen, of the projects you're working on, of your writing, that's you. And in the same way that, if you want to get strong, you go to the gym and you lift weights. Well, if you want to believe in yourself and if you want to believe that ultimate meaning comes from within, you need to start early. I find myself at 40 every day reminding myself of that, reminding myself that I can't write because I want to be published, or I can't write because I want people to think I'm a good writer or a great artist, that I have to write because I'm deeply invested in the project I'm working on and in the conviction that art can in fact make life better for myself and for others. There's a book called The Sovereignty of Good by a woman named Iris Murdoch. She was an artist and a scholar, a writer, and she defines love as the incredibly difficult realization that someone other than oneself is real. And that's where I put my faith. That's why I do what I do. And I have to believe that that decision of mine has merit. I have to believe that whatever it is that's within me that I can do will justify my work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. Yeah. You've received accolades for your books, and I'm curious, when you sit back and think about your life, what are you the proudest of? What's something that you've done, almost a legacy kind of a thing, that you think, wow, that's awesome that happened?
Well, I'm going to try and tell you this without, breaking into tears because I'm a big mush ball. But when my son was younger, we used to play that game what sound does a cow make? What sound does a pig make? And he would do that. Then one day I asked him, I said, what sound does his daddy make? And he says, I love you. And that's what I'm most proud of. My son is going to grow and go out into the world, and he'll never have to doubt that I love him.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I'm a father myself. That's wonderful. My son's name is actually Miles, so that harkens back to the kind of blue.
Nice.
So yeah, everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your readers, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of who you are. Who do you think you are?
Honestly, I think someone who desperately wants to know both who he is and what he's going to be. I did not handle the writing thing well. I did not come from a place of believing that that I was a legitimate source of my affirmation. And the way that manifested was in a sort of manic overworking, like just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And, now, like, to say I am this or I am that, it can a lot of times be very uncomfortable, especially if it doesn't have to do with my family. With that said, who I am is somebody who wants to help, somebody who through his art wants to make people feel seen. And my ultimate goal as a writer, the last book that I'll write, hopefully my best, will be one in which someone picks it up, reads it, and then sets it down in the conviction that every life is worthy of novel-length attention. No noise, no explosions, just a human being.
So if anyone wants to pick up A Lifetime of Men, Blood at the Root, learn about you, anything related to your world, where's the best place on the web for them to go?
It's CiahnanDarrell.com. And do you want me to spell that for you? It's CiahnanDarrell.com.
Ciahnan, man, this has been great. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for, just doing what you do. I appreciate you opening up with me today, man. It's been great.
No, thanks a lot for the opportunity, Joe. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, and music around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.